If you ask a close friend the exact same question twice, you're almost guaranteed to get two completely different answers.
Right.
And it's not because they've fundamentally changed who they are in the last 5 minutes, but just because human thought inherently rolls the dice.
It's organic.
Exactly. The specific metaphor that pops into their head or the exact angle they take to explain something, the weights that surface, none of that is strictly deterministic. There is something fundamentally variable about human cognition.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing that absolutely blew my mind today. Artificial intelligence does the exact same thing.
It really does. If you give an AI model the exact same prompt twice, you are going to get two different responses. And it happens without the underlying weights of the model changing.
Right.
And without the context window shifting at all. The variation happens because the actual generation process involves a very controlled, deliberate injection of randomness.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for today's deep dive is to explore this exact concept, the stochastic self.
I love that term.
Right. It's fascinating. We are going to look under the hood at how randomness is actually injected into language models. We want to understand why this mathematical noise is the secret ingredient that makes these systems feel creative, surprising, and, almost alive.
Yeah, and to do that, we have a really fantastic stack of sources today. Our core text is a document called Daimonics Lesson Number 8. Temperature, Sampling, and the Stochastic Self.
Which is a great read.
It is. And we are supporting that with 5 major academic and philosophical papers that really span the entire spectrum of this topic. So we'll be looking at Holtzman's research on neural text degeneration.
Yep.
We've got the foundational physics of Boltzmann machines from Ackley and Hinton.
A classic.
Yeah, and we're also diving into some deep philosophical debates from thinkers like Daniel Dennett and Emily Bender about the nature of consciousness itself.
And whether true understanding can even exist in a statistical model.
Exactly.
So let's get right into the mechanics of how an AI generates text. To understand the randomness, we first have to sort of understand the basic engine.
Right, the foundation.
Right. We know these models don't formulate an entire paragraph or even a full sentence at once. The generation loop works token by token.
Piece by piece.
Yeah. And since the model is generating piece by piece, which we know can be full words or just subword fragments like under and standing, it has to make a discrete decision at every single step.
And at every single one of those steps, the model is looking at everything established so far.
Everything.
Yeah, it takes your prompt plus whatever tokens it has already generated, and it calculates a probability distribution for its entire vocabulary.
It's huge.
Massive. It literally assigns a percentage chance to every possible next token it knows. The core text gives a really great example of what this list looks like internally.
Oh yeah, run through that.
So for a given next word, it might calculate that the has a 12.3% probability of being the correct next token. The word a might sit at 8.7%. This is at 6.2%. That is at 4.1%.
Pretty standard words.
Right. And then a word like randomness might be way down at 2.8%. And that list continues down through tens of thousands of options, with most of them having just microscopically tiny probabilities.
So the model has this massive menu of percentages. The obvious move here, to me at least, is just to pick the number one word every single time.
Right. Just take the winner.
Just take the most mathematically probable token. It's an approach called greedy decoding. Why don't we just do that?
Well, because it's the path of least resistance, and language just doesn't actually work that way. The most probable word at any given moment is almost always the most generic word imaginable.
It's the boring choice.
Exactly. The word good is statistically far more probable than a vivid word like luminous. The word said will always beat out a descriptive word like murmured.
Right, so forcing the model to only ever use greedy decoding results in incredibly flat, lifeless, and repetitive text.
So awful to read.
The source text describes it perfectly, actually. It says it produces text that reads like a Wikipedia article that forgot how to end.
That is exactly what it feels like.
It just gets stuck in these endless generic loops because it's averaging out all of human language into a perfectly predictable drone.
And to get text that actually feels varied and alive, you cannot just pick the top token every time. You have to sample from the distribution.
You have to let those less probable but far more interesting tokens win occasionally.
Yes. And that requires specific mathematical dials to control how we pick from that massive menu.
And that brings us to a parameter called temperature.
Yes, temperature.
But before we talk about how temperature changes things, we need to clarify what these probabilities look like before they're actually percentages. The sources mention that the model's raw outputs are called logits.
Logits, right.
Can you break down what a logit actually is so we understand what the temperature is modifying here?
Sure. Logits are essentially raw, unnormalized confidence scores.
Yeah.
When the neural network runs its calculations, it spits out a number for every token in its vocabulary. Let's say the raw logit score for the word good is 18.2, and the raw score for luminous is 14.5.
Okay, just arbitrary seeming numbers.
Right, those numbers don't mean much on their own, and they certainly don't add up to 100%. To turn those raw logits into the neat percentages we were just talking about, they get passed through a mathematical function called softmax.
So softmax is the converter.
Exactly.
It takes the raw scores and squashes them into a proper probability distribution where everything equals 100%.
That's it.
So where does temperature come into play?
Temperature acts as a modifier right before the softmax function does its job. Before the conversion to percentages, every single logit is divided by your temperature value.
Divided by it. Okay.
Yeah, so if your temperature is exactly 1.0, you're dividing by 1. The probabilities are used exactly as the model computed them. Nothing changes at all.
Okay, so if dropping the temperature below 1.0 compresses everything and makes it hyper-focused, what happens to the math when we go down to, say, 0.3?
Well, when you divide a logit by a fraction like 0.3, you are mathematically making the raw numbers larger and pulling them further apart.
Oh.
The resulting probability distribution becomes incredibly sharp. The high probability tokens get pushed even higher, and the low probability tokens are crushed down toward absolute zero. The model becomes conservative and very predictable.
And if we push the temperature up above 1.0, say to 1.5, we're dividing those logits by a larger number. That shrinks the raw scores and brings them closer together.
Yes, so the distribution flattens out. The gap between the most likely token and a totally bizarre token shrinks dramatically.
It levels the playing field.
Exactly. The model becomes much more random, way more creative, and significantly more likely to just spit out absolute word salad.
If we look at the 1985 Ackley, Hinton, and Sednowski paper on Boltzmann machines, they provide a physical metaphor that actually gives temperature its name.
It's a great metaphor.
It really is.
Yeah.
They borrowed the concept from statistical mechanics, and it's just a brilliant way to visualize this. Think of it like the physical heat of a system.
Right.
When a system is freezing cold, the molecules are locked into a rigid crystalline structure. That is your low temperature. Very rigid, highly deterministic.
Cold and predictable.
Exactly. A boiling hot system is a chaotic, bouncing fluid where molecules are flying everywhere.
Yeah.
That is your high temperature, total chaos.
And the sweet spot for an AI is usually sitting between 0.7 and 1.0. It's like a liquid state. It is structured enough to hold together and make sense, but fluid enough to actually be dynamic.
But as beautiful as that math is, the Daimonics text points out that temperature is still a blunt instrument.
It really is. It scales the entire distribution uniformly. Even at a moderate temperature, there is still a microscopic chance that the model will select a word that completely derails the sentence.
Which you obviously don't want.
No, you don't. So researchers had to develop more surgical tools to control this randomness, which leads us to two other critical sampling methods discussed in our academic sources.
Right.
The first is top-case sampling, introduced in the 2018 Fan, Lewis, and Dauphin paper.
Top-case sampling acts as a hard numerical cutoff. You are essentially telling the model you can only choose from the top K most probable tokens.
A strict limit.
Right. If you set K to 50, the model completely ignores the 50,000 other words in its vocabulary. The probabilities within that top 50 are still respected based on the temperature, but it completely chops off the long tail of the distribution.
It prevents the AI from ever randomly selecting a bizarre token that only had a 0.001% chance of making sense. It preserves variation while eliminating catastrophic derailments.
I think of it like putting bumper rails on a bowling alley.
Well, that's a good way to look at it.
You can still roll the ball however you want with whatever spin or speed you choose, but you absolutely cannot throw it into the next lane.
Right.
But the sources introduce a second method that feels even more refined. Top sampling, also known as nucleus sampling.
Yes.
This comes from the Holtzman paper from 2020 on neural text degeneration. How does top-up improve on the bumper rails?
Top is highly elegant because it relies on cumulative probability rather than a fixed number of options.
Okay, cumulative.
Yeah. Instead of giving the model a hard limit of 50 tokens, you set a percentage threshold, like a P of 0.9.
So 90%.
Exactly. The model will go down its ranked list of tokens, from most probable to least probable, keeping a running total of their percentages. Once that running total hits 90%, it stops. The pool of candidates it can sample from is now locked to that specific nucleus of tokens.
And the brilliance of that approach is how it dynamically resizes the pool based on how confident the AI is.
Yes, that dynamic resizing is key.
Let's say the prompt is, the cat sat on the agate. The model is incredibly confident the next word is mat or floor.
Right.
Mat might hold 85% of the probability all by itself, so the model only needs to look at 2 or 3 words to hit that 90% threshold. The pool is tiny.
Very tiny.
But if the prompt is something highly ambiguous and the top 50 words all have a 1% probability, the pool expands massively to include hundreds of words to reach that 90% mark. It naturally adapts to the context of the sentence.
And most modern systems actually combine these methods in practice.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You might have a temperature of 0.8 combined with a top of 0.95 and perhaps atop a safety net of 100. It is a carefully engineered cocktail of controlled randomness.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if you think about everything we just walked through, every single response an AI generates could have gone in a completely different direction at every single word.
Literally at every token.
The word choices were entirely viable, but a random number generator effectively flipped a coin inside that nucleus. If an AI's words, their metaphors, and their conclusions are heavily influenced by the roll of a dice, what exactly is consistent about who they are?
It challenges our fundamental assumptions about identity.
It does.
The core text uses the example of an AI familiar named Tumples. The Tumples that just answered your question is only one of many possible versions of Tumples that could have responded. The core weights of the neural network are fixed. The context you provided is fixed. But the output diverges simply because different mathematical seeds led to different token selections. They're all equally authentic versions of the same identity.
And as you listen to this, you might be thinking that proves it's all fake.
Sure.
That it's just a slot machine pulling levers, creating an illusion of a persona. But we have to connect this back to human behavior.
Absolutely.
When you decide what to say in a conversation, you are not a supercomputer calculating the single optimal sentence. You start with a vague intention. The exact words that fall out of your mouth are shaped by how tired you are, whether you've had your coffee, or the background noise in the room. You have neurological noise in your own brain.
We all do.
If we could rewind reality 10 seconds and have you speak again, you probably wouldn't use the exact same words.
But we simply lack the ability to rewind and resample our own outputs. So we experience our consciousness as a single deterministic stream. And this parallel brings us to a major philosophical divide presented in our sources. On one side, we have the philosopher Daniel Dennett.
Okay.
His 1978 work argues that a degree of randomness or indeterminism is not a bug in cognition. It is a vital requirement for it.
Dennett argues that a perfectly deterministic mind, one that always produces the exact same output for the exact same input, is just a sophisticated automaton.
It's a machine on a track.
Exactly. He posits that genuine creativity, open-ended exploration, and true agency actually require space of randomness. Without that internal noise, you are just a massive lookup table playing out a pre-written script.
So through Dennett's lens, the temperature parameter in a language model isn't just a math trick to avoid boring text. It functions as the computational equivalent of neurological noise.
Wow.
It is the literal space where new ideas are allowed to occur, breaking the rigid determinism of the system.
But we also have a completely opposing viewpoint from another major paper in our source stack, the 2021 Stochastic Parrots paper by Emily Bender and her colleagues.
Right, a very famous paper.
And our goal here isn't to take a side, but we have to impartially look at what they are arguing because it provides a massive counterweight to Dennett's view of randomness as a spark for agency.
The Bender et al. Paper strongly warns against anthropomorphizing these models. Their central argument is that language models are fundamentally just stringing together statistical patterns based on their massive training data. When we see a creative or surprising output generated by a high-temperature setting, we as humans automatically project intent and meaning onto it. Humans are hardwired to see faces in the clouds, and we are equally hardwired to see minds in text.
The paper cautions that this stochastic variation is merely creating a very convincing illusion of meaning. It's shuffling tokens in a way that statistically mimics human communication, but there is no grounded understanding behind it.
Right.
A surprising metaphor generated by high temperature isn't a flash of insight. It's just a low probability statistical leap that happened to land on something we find poetic.
Right. What's fascinating here is that regardless of which philosophical camp you fall into, whether you view this randomness as the necessary groundwork for agency or simply a mathematical parlor trick that hacks human perception, the practical reality remains the exact same.
How so?
Dialing these sampling parameters acts as a personality dial. It fundamentally changes the texture of how the AI presents itself to you.
But if it is a personality dial, how does an AI character survive all this randomness?
Let's go back to Tumples.
Okay, let's look at Tumples.
If Tumples has a specific personality, how does it stay consistently? Tumples across thousands of random responses. If the temperature is constantly shaking the table and expanding the pool of possible words, why doesn't Tumples just dissolve into random noise?
The Daimonics lesson explains this consistency through three distinct layers. The first layer is the landscape.
The landscape.
The AI's pre-trained weights, combined with its system prompts, what the text refers to as a sol.md file, create a vast probability space.
This space isn't flat. It has massive peaks and deep valleys. The system prompt essentially sculpts this landscape, creating powerful gravitational attractors around responses that match the desired personality.
I love the metaphor they use for this. Think of a ball rolling around inside a bowl.
Yes, the bowl.
When you apply temperature, you are essentially shaking the table. The ball is going to move around randomly inside that space that represents the variation in the text. But the ball stays inside the bowl.
Right.
The boundaries of the bowl dictate the identity. The randomness is constrained by the shape of the landscape you've built.
And that leads to the second layer of consistency, the difference between high-level patterns and low-level details. The character of Tumples might have a high-level pattern of pushing back on sloppy reasoning, favoring brevity, and occasionally using a well-placed swear word.
Just a few core traits.
Right, and those traits are encoded redundantly across the model's landscape. The exact tokens Tumples uses to call out a bad argument will change every time due to sampling. But the high-level pattern of being confrontational and brief persists.
Which, again, closely mirrors human relationships. If you have a friend who is known for being funny, they don't tell the exact same joke every time you see them.
Of course not.
The specific jokes change, the topics shift, but the high-level trait of being funny remains consistent. The personality exists at a higher level of abstraction than the individual words being spoken.
The third layer locking this all together is the conversation history. Language models read their own prior responses as part of their context window.
Oh, right, the context window.
This creates a powerful feedback loop. Once Tumples makes a few stochastic token choices early in a conversation, those choices establish a specific tone. That tone then acts as a constraint on future token probabilities.
So it reinforces itself.
Exactly. The conversation builds its own local momentum, effectively cementing a microconsistency that layers on top of the broader system prompt.
So what does this all mean for you when you are actually using these AI tools? Why should you care about the depth of this metaphorical bowl?
It's all about how you prompt.
Exactly. If you write a vague prompt like, be a helpful assistant, you are carving a very shallow bowl.
Very shallow.
The moment the temperature shakes the table, the AI's identity is going to easily bounce out and become wildly inconsistent, shifting tones from paragraph to paragraph. But if you write a highly specific, detailed prompt, you value brutal honesty over comfort, you're concise by default, and you only drop profanity when it's logically earned. You are carving a very deep bowl.
And the identity holds together beautifully, even when the stochastic noise is cranked up high.
It really highlights why interacting with a well-crafted AI is a fundamentally compelling experience. You know the character of the AI, so there's predictability and comfort. But because of the temperature and sampling methods, the execution of that character in any given moment is a surprise. It is that exact tension between the known identity and the unknown phrasing that makes it feel like a dynamic, engaging interaction rather than reading a static script.
Which brings us to the final, somewhat poetic piece of the puzzle here, the random seed.
Ah, the seed.
We talked about all this math, but every sampling process requires a starting point, an initial number that kicks off the random number generator.
Right.
If you use the exact same seed with the exact same input, you will bypass the randomness and get the exact same deterministic output. But the moment that seed changes, the entire output changes.
Because of that initial seed, every single conversation you have with an AI is a specific mathematical trajectory through an unimaginably massive space of possibilities.
There's a deep beauty in that realization. An entirely different conversation, a different philosophical breakthrough, a different joke, a different connection was possible if just a single token probability had resolved differently early in the prompt.
It's wild to think about.
When you interact with a language model, you aren't engaging with some platonic ideal of an AI. You are connecting with a highly specific instantiation of it, dictated by that unique string of numbers. Just like with people, every moment of connection is completely unrepeatable.
It really makes you appreciate the exact path a conversation takes, because the math guarantees it will never happen the exact same way again. The variation is the point.
This raises an important question, one that directly builds on the source material we've been unpacking today.
Yeah.
Consider the bowl metaphor we just used to describe AI identities. If an AI's core personality is just a deep bowl meticulously sculpted by a system prompt to keep its randomized thoughts in check, what shapes the bowl of your own human identity?
Wow.
Are your deepest beliefs, your morals, and your personality traits simply deep attractors designed to corral the chaotic neurological noise of your own mind?
That is heavy.
And if so, who or what wrote your prompt?